Hi! Today I'm going to show you how to achieve root access to Shenron 3, which is the last machine in the Shenron series. If you have any suggestions for series or individual machines you'd like me to do in the future, let me know in the comments. Let's get started. First things first, let's find our target machine. Use nmap to scan for all hosts on your network using the command nmap and then your IP range. In my case, that is the 10.0.2.0 network with the /24 indicating a classful subnet mask. In other words, scan for hosts on every IP address between 10.0.2.0 and 10.0.2.255. With that done, we see our target machine at 10.0.2.36. Let's run a more detailed scan using the command nmap 10.0.2.36 -A. This shows us that there is only a single port open, which is an HTTP port running WordPress version 4.6. Now, we know from the previous Shenron machines that we need to edit our hosts file to be able to view the web pages properly, so let's do that before proceeding. Use the command sudo nano /etc/hosts. Use the arrow keys to move down to a new line and enter the target IP address, then press tab to keep things neat, and then type Shenron. Hit Ctrl X to exit and Y to save. With that done, open up a browser and navigate to the web server by typing in the target IP address, in my case 10.0.2.36. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot going on here, so we'll move on. Back in your bash shell, let's search for additional files and directories that might be available to us. It doesn't matter which directory enumeration tool you use for this, but for the sake of variety, I'm going to use dir search. Run the command dir search -u http://10.0.2.36. If you wanted to do a recursive search, in other words, if you wanted to search inside any discovered directories, you can do this by adding the -r modifier. This takes a lot longer though, and for our purposes it's not needed. We can see a few directories, including one named admin. This takes us to an admin login portal, so the next step is to find some login credentials. In general, there are a few different ways you could go about finding credentials. You could search manually for usernames in any available files or directories. You could guess based on other information. For instance, we might guess that there is a user named Shenron because the previous two machines in the series had one. You could use a brute force approach in which you systematically try all usernames from a list, or you could try more common usernames such as admin. In our case, we are going to use the user enumeration function of the WordPress scanner we used in the previous machine. Use the command wp-scan --url http://10.0.2.36 -enumerate u. This finds the one user, admin. So now we need a password to go with it. We are once again going to use the WordPress scanner to brute force our way through it, but this time we can specify the username as admin and then test every password from a list, in our case, the RockU password list. Use the command wp-scan --url http://10.0.2.36 -passwords /user/share/wordlists/rocku.txt -usernames admin. With that done, we can see that we have successfully uncovered the credentials for admin, with the password being I love rocku. Let's head back to the WordPress admin portal and use our new credentials to log in. So, now that we are logged into the admin portal for WordPress, what are we going to do? We want to be able to navigate the target machine through a web shell. To do this, we are going to click on Appearance in the left-hand menu, then select Editor. Select any .php file from the right-hand side, I chose Archive, and then replace the entire contents with the code for a reverse shell. The concept here is actually quite simple. When I use my web browser to connect to the location of this PHP file, the web server executes the code and then sends the output to my browser. My admin access here allows me to change that code. That means that when I attempt to connect to this PHP file, it will now execute whatever code I have inserted. In my case, that is the code for a reverse shell, So when the server executes that code, it will reach out to an IP and port specified in my reverse shell code, and attempt to create a connection. I highly recommend you have the code for a reverse shell saved with your host IP and preferred port already configured, but if you don't, Kali comes with a whole lot of them in /user/share/web shells. Just change the IP address to your host IP and pick a port. I use 1234. Save your changes to the .php file and head back to your terminal. Like I said, the reverse shell code will reach out to form a connection, so we need to set up a listener to be ready for that signal. We can do this with netcat using the command nc-lnvp1234, or whatever your chosen port was. Finally, back in your web browser, navigate to http://10.0.2.36/wp-content/themes/2011/archive.php. Or, if you used a different PHP file, replace archive.php with the one you used. If all has gone well, we should now have a web shell where our listener was. The next step is to gain user access. Let's see if we can find another username. To do this, we are going to look for files that might contain usernames. One such file is the password file, which we can view with the command cat/etc/passwd. Turns out there is a user called Shenron, and we can also see that there is an SQL database. When I did this machine the first time, I spent quite a lot of time looking through that database, but I will save you the time and tell you there isn't much in there. Instead, we are going to try to switch user to Shenron. Now, this bit kind of annoyed me because I spent a long time searching for a password for Shenron before even thinking of trying the same password we already have. I just assumed it wouldn't be the same one. The lesson here, always try the obvious. Anyway, use the command su Shenron and the password ILoveRockYou to switch user. Let's upgrade to a full bash shell with the command python3 -c open single quote import space pty semicolon pty.spawn open bracket open double quote /bin/bash close double quote close bracket close single quote. Now use cd/home/Shenron to change to the home directory for Shenron, ls to list the contents, and cat to read the local.txt flag. If you are at all familiar with my videos, you will know that the first thing I do after gaining user access is to search for anything that can be run with elevated privileges. We can do this with the command sudo-l. Unfortunately, this needs a sudo password, which we don't have. Next option is to search for SUID files, which I discussed in more detail in the Shenron 2 video, but are files which can be run with the permissions of the file owner rather than the current user. We can search for them using the command find /type f-perm -u = s 2 > /dev/null. In other words, use the find command, starting in the root directory, searching for files with SUID permissions and suppressing error messages. We can see that the network file in the Shenron folder is an SUID file, and if you use the command ls-all, we can see that it is owned by the root user. Therefore, because it is an SUID file, whenever it is run, it will run with root privileges. Next, let's see what it does. Use the command /network. It appears to run the netstat command. We can take advantage of this in a few simple steps. First, we need to create our own vulnerable version of netstat. Then, we need to make it so that the network binary runs our version rather than the real version. Let's move to the temp directory to create our vulnerable netstat using the command cd/tmp. The reason we do this is because the temp directory will always have write permissions, and so we can easily create new files or directories. Next, create our own netstat binary that will execute a bash shell using the command echo/bin/bash > netstat. Let's make it executable with the command chmod +x netstat. In other words, use the change mode function to add execute permissions to netstat. We now have our vulnerable netstat binary, but there are two problems. First, we could run this script as it is, but because it will run with the current user permissions, we won't get any privilege escalation. Second, if we run the network SUID, it will run the real netstat with root permissions rather than our vulnerable one. To change that, we need to alter the path variable. The path environment variable is a list of directories. Whenever you enter a command into a terminal, the shell will search those directories in order until it finds an executable file that matches the command name. You can use the command echo $path to show the current path variable. What we want to do is add the temp directory to the start of the path variable. That way, when we run our network binary, the first place it will look for netstat is in the temp directory, where it will find a matching name and it will execute our vulnerable version. To change the path variable, use the command export path equals /tmp $path. Export will make the specified variable, in this case path, available to any subsequent commands. The /tmp adds the temp directory, and the $path denotes the current value of the path variable. This means we are simply adding the temp directory to the start of the path variable rather than replacing all of it. With that done, head back to the Shenron directory with cd/home/Shenron and run the network binary with /network. We should now have a root shell, but if you want to confirm it, use the whoami command. All that's left is to get the root flag. Change to the root user's home directory with cd/root, ls to list the contents, and cat root.txt to read the flag. Let's summarize how we completed the Shenron 3 machine. We used Nmap to perform a network scan and identify our target machine. We then used Nmap again to scan for open ports and run version detection. We used dir search to do some directory enumeration. We used wp-scan for both user enumeration and password cracking. We then modified a PHP file to create a reverse shell and gain access to the web server. From there, we viewed the password file to identify additional users. We then searched for SUID files and exploited their sudo permissions to grant ourselves a bash terminal with root privileges. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any suggestions for machines I should cover, let me know in the comments. Until then, good luck with your own hacking exploits.